what we're really about is supporting state-funded schools to make sure classics is on the curriculum, and your support helps us to do that. We've got some students in the house tonight from Harris Girls Academy in Bromley, and I know that... Give them a cheer. And I know we've got plenty of teachers following along online as well, and in the room. Some other teachers here as well. Great. Thank you. A round of applause for them as well. You know, the teachers on the ground doing it. Come on. So, before we start, I just want to say a big thank you to Jamie and Carolyn here at Linklaters, who've hosted and organised everything for us here tonight. The fact that they're supporting us and they're covering your wine and nibbles later means that more of your ticket price can go straight into the work that we're doing to support state schools. So that's fantastic. I'm sorry for those of you online, we haven't provided wine and nibbles coming to your door later, so you will have to provide your own. I'm very sorry. But before you can have that wine and nibbles, we have some important matters to attend to. So I'm going to hand you over to your host for tonight, Dr. Emma Greensmith. Emma is the Associate Professor of Classics at the University of Oxford and a Fellow of St John's College. She works on ancient Greek literature, especially epic and its use in the early and Christian Empire. Her books include The Resurrection of Homer in Imperial Greece, The Cambridge Companion to Ancient Greek Epic, and her latest book, Homer and the Bible. So please join me in welcoming Emma.
Thank you so much, Jo, and I particularly appreciated that subtle woo for Homer and the Bible. When it comes out, please buy it, everyone. So my job tonight is really just to host, but also to set the scene for what's about to happen. I thought the best way to do this would be to engage in some good old-fashioned epic storytelling, to make you use your imagination. So I want you to picture the scene that I'm about to describe. If you so wish, close your eyes. We're in the midst of the Aegean Sea. There's water everywhere. Water everywhere, to be precise, and not a drop to drink. The weather is appalling. It's a truly epic storm, Poseidon's finest work. Wind is howling, rain is lashing. And in the midst of this turmoil is a single boat. It's not a great vessel at the best of times. Think Odysseus's raft rather than the Argo. And this is clearly not the best of times. In these torrential conditions, it's looking extremely precarious. And on this boat are 4 figures from the ancient world. It is a motley crew, to be sure. Basically, the time-space continuum has been disrupted to enable these figures to coexist on this boat in the Aegean Sea. It is becoming increasingly clear that the boat can simply no longer endure their combined weight. If it's going to make it through the storm without sinking completely, there's a need to lighten the load. The only solution, then, is for one of the party to be ejected, to be cast overboard, and to be consigned, definitely, and that's important, to a watery grave. But which one? Whom? Who stays and who goes? And that is where you all virtually come in. In what follows, these 4 incredible classicists are going to talk about one of these characters, one of these figures who is on the boat. But rather than advocating for why their character should survive and remain on the boat, they're going to be doing something far more interesting and something far more cruel. That is, they'll be arguing for the opposite. They're going to try to persuade you that their figure is so awful, so nasty, or perhaps so unnecessary to antiquity and to us, that the ancient world and its modern reception would be better off without them. And therefore it is they who should be cast overboard. So the idea really is a balloon debate with some significant and great differences. moving from the air to the sea, and arguing against rather than pushing in favour. So that's what's happening. Hope you can agree that we'll be in store for a great night. In terms of the kind of more minutiae of practicalities, this is how we'll proceed. I'm going to introduce each of our 4 speakers, and they'll then speak for roughly 15 minutes and no longer against their character. Then once they've all made their pitch against, I'll then invite them back on for a kind of quick-fire lightning pitch, 30 seconds max, which can, because you're all good at improvisation, also take into account of some of the other points that have been made, can give you a final plea for why you should cast their figure overboard. I'll then take the vote, and we're just going to do it in the good old-fashioned way of a hand raise, and there'll be a not-so-old-fashioned version of the online vote. We'll announce the winner, and then we'll exit the stage and the storm and continue the conversation over some drinks and canapes. So, that's what's happening, and without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our first anti-speaker, who is, she says, turning the page subtly.
I think she knows who I am, I don't know.
Dr. Danny Pucknell, who is head of classics and ancient history at Cardiff and Vale College. And Danny's biography, forget this brilliant pitch that I've just made, is important in and of its own right. In 2019, recognising that no state schools or colleges in his local area offered classics at GCSE or A-level, he introduced classical civilization and later ancient history at Cardiff and Vale College, which now attracts a large and diverse student body from across South Wales, including a lot of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And alongside his teaching, Danny's also been closely involved in promoting the study of classics in the Welsh state sector, reviving the Classics for All Welsh Classics Network to support schools and teaching and making the subject accessible for the country. In addition, Danny took a leading role in relaunching the Cardiff Classics District branch of the Classical Association in 2003 and is the current chair of the branch. Which is all to say that Danny is clearly a hero of our subject. But he's going to talk to you about one of the subject's greatest villains. Someone who is a recurring presence, and I say this as a tutor who reads a lot of personal statements. Someone who comes up on personal statements time and again, and whom we all love to hate. So here is Dr. Danny Pucknell speaking against Cicero.
Thank you, Emma. Very kind of you. When I got here earlier, somebody said, "You've got the easiest job in classics." And I thought, they've never tried to teach second year 3 till 5 on a Friday. and then I realised they meant Cicero, and I thought, oh, okay, fair enough. Now, we all know that the worst villains, of course, are those that are completely convinced that they're not a villain. Everybody else is a villain. That the righteousness of their cause is such that others are merely an obstacle or an impediment to be moved or gotten around. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you Marcus Tullius Cicero, statesman, author, alleged wit, and villain. So absorbed with his own alleged genius was Cicero that he wrote about it in voluminous correspondence, which I'm sure many of you have been subjected to over the course of your GCSEs, A-levels, university studies. We've all played Hunt the Verb in a Ciceronian speech. You look at the person next to you and you go, "I'm on line 5, what the hell's he going on about? I don't know. Okay, so, and for that alone, he should be given the shove over the side. However, you know, we have time. I have 13 and a half minutes yet. I felt it was only right, because he thinks ever so much of himself, I thought I'd give you the other side of the story. So Cicero's reputation is enormous, but his achievements are frighteningly few. All the villains, and I mean they're alter egos, not this bunch here, all the villains that will be presented to you later on have achievements. Cicero's got zip, zilch, nada, nothing. So he's written, allegedly, between 800 and 900,000 words. But as George R. Martin wrote once in Game of Thrones, words are wind. So we'll find that Cicero has summoned a lot of bluster over the course of his life, but tonight he's going to find words an inadequate life raft. So, a bit harsh, maybe. Cicero is considered a paragon of virtue and Western thought, defender of idealism, and at a push, somebody who died for his political beliefs. If the people from the school haven't done that yet, I didn't say that. He doesn't die. Don't worry about it. You'll read about it later on. Anyway, I think you know, seeing Cicero as a hero is I'm asking you this evening to lean in a bit, tilt the mirror slightly. It's a bit like you looking at your hair in your house mirror and then going to the barber's and thinking, Christ, is that what it really looks like? And that's what we're doing looking at Cicero. So before we get to specifics, I want to focus on the general. I'll start with a couple of terms. We'll see how we get on. Arrogant, boring, nosy, a busybody. I think all of these could be levelled at Cicero. What about self-important? Hypocritical? If anybody really wants to stick the boot in, we could go for complete fantasist. And even though that's quite an extensive list, these are Cicero's good qualities. So, interestingly enough, I think a good measure of this sort of thing is what I call the aeroplane test. Now, for it to work, generally you need a room full of people. Good. So, room full of people. What I do is I say, you're just taking your seat on a long-haul flight. Go wherever you like, it's on me. I'll pay for it. And what happens is, who would you least like to be placed next to? Now, I've tried this with all sorts of classes. Normally I say, you can sit next to Lucius Cornelius Sulla, or you can sit next to Cicero. Now, we've always covered Sulla, so they know exactly who they'd be sitting next to. There is no secret here. Sulla, most dangerous man to walk Jupiter's green earth, or Cicero, unanimously. I say it again for the people in the cheap seats at the back. Unanimously, everyone avoids Cicero. Now, it goes like this. They figure that as long as they don't look at, smile at, or breathe in the direction of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, they will be fine. What they don't want, what they can't abide, is for Cicero to say, did you know? I once saved the Republic from a major political conspiracy. I'm so glad the flight is 7 hours. I will have just enough time to tell you all about it. And the scratching at the windows, let me out, please, let me out. Speaking of that conspiracy, and I do mean conspiracy, if we while our way back to 63 BC, I'm just in time to see Cicero ascend the political pyramid and win the consulship. And here we go. Now, in his defence, some might say Cicero was part of Patra, he was father of the nation. I could also point out so was Augustus and leave that there. But I think that would shortchange you, so I'll try and do a bit better. Now, this is something of which Cicero was inordinately proud, but more on that later, and which he never shut up about, but more on that later. Anyway, 63 BC, Cicero, head of the Republic. Now, the so-called conspiracy of Catiline. So, Lucius Sergius Catilina, or Catiline to his friends, was, according to Sallust, another bit of a scally, but you know, whatever, says that he had no little ability. Despite this, Catiline had some rather popular policies, the abolition of all debt being one. Now, who would decry the release from the crushing burden of consumer debt but Cicero? I ask you, the taste of freedom from debt. Marcus Tullius Cicero is who? He decries the entire scheme as dangerous and part of a plot. Now, if the Romans had heard of the Grinch, I know what Cicero would be getting for his Saturnalia present. Now, not content with that, Cicero accuses Catiline of attempting to overthrow the Republic. He accuses him in the Temple of Jupiter, surrounded by the Senate, and he declaims with very little evidence that he intends to murder Cicero, wouldn't we all, given the chance, and overthrow the Republic. Well, in order to gather this evidence to convict Catiline, as we know, Cicero contrives a letter from a tribe in Gaul that says that Catiline enlisted them to overthrow the Republic. Now, I don't know about you, But that seems to me to be not an honest thing to do. It seems to me to be ends justify the means. I need to be famous. Where can I find a conspiracy? Oh, there's one. And away we go. Now, in addition, after Catiline leaves Rome, Cicero has 5 of his close associates strangled as co-conspirators. Now, he'll say, there was a state of emergency and the Senate voted for it and yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. But it's also worth noting that when Cicero was a young lawyer and Gaius Verres was accused of, executing citizens without trial, he threw up his arms and he said, this is outrageous. The man is scum. He should be guilty. Didn't bother him when he was banging on about a conspiracy which he was going to benefit from, though, did he? So I'd add hypocrisy and political murder to Cicero's list of flaws. So I present to you Cicero, killer and hypocrite, certainly not a person who you or I should be wanting or going out of our way to save. If that's not enough to give Cicero an early bath, I'll say that he aims for this to benefit him financially and politically. He even wrote a poem. Oh, dear me, right. How fortunate a natal day was thine in that late consulate, O Rome of mine. Yeesh. Right, really, must we subject the other 3 poor sods, no matter how villainous they might be, to such narcissistic rubbish? This is really the most self-important drivel. Alas, Cicero will probably save himself by default. I expect the 3 others with whom he shares the boat will be quite willing to fling themselves over the side just to get away from this pontificating windbag. Now, I honestly, I urge you, you have the chance to save 3 other lives here, okay? Putting an end to Cicero will definitely, you heard Emma, he'll drown. So just get rid of him. Be utilitarian about it, okay? Greatest good for the greatest number, for God's sake, okay? Toss him over the side, the other 3 people get to live and walk away. Look, this does the job for me. Look how smug he looks. Good God. Why would we not get rid of him? Now, to add to this, he has no social awareness, okay? He writes a letter to Pompey, and he says, your letter only contained a small indication of your regard for myself. I know. At the same time as this, Pompey had dispatched Rome's greatest enemy, Mithridates of Pontus, consolidated the provinces of Bithynia Pontus, provisionally organised the tax revenues of the new province, and oversaw a religious judgment in the city of Jerusalem. All this, and yet Cicero complains that Pompey had not given him due respect for his achievements. Now, one of my lecturers once said that Cicero's career amounted to storming the local pub and demanding a triumph. So you can see where we are with the sort of level of his achievements. Now, Cicero is very certain that he's friends with Pompey. Pompey's much less sure that he's friends with Cicero. Cicero's one of those. We've all got one. You might even, you might have brought them with you tonight because you couldn't shake them. The one that always has to top everybody else's adventure. So if you've seen an elephant on safari, they've ridden an elephant bareback through the savannah. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, wait, I don't have a friend like that, I have some unfortunate news for you. Now, to return to the condemnation of Cicero, he was also an outrageous busybody who often poked his nose into situations which had absolutely nothing to do with him. Case in point would be the 62 Bonadea trial. Now, it involves a bit of a scandal. Cicero loves a scandal, loves it. And so what happens is this. The Bonadea is a sacred festival. Females only. Men are supposed to be, not around, or at least not seen. It's presided over by the women of the household of the Pontifex Maximus, or chief priest. In the year 62, this happens to be Aurelia, mother of Julius Caesar. You may woo if you like, but Aurelia's cool. There we are, thank you. Now, at this female-only ceremony, men are banned. And one Publius Clodius, who could be described as a bit of a scally, disguised himself as a woman and went to have a look around just to see what was what. Now, Aurelia, being a very, very sharp woman, notices that the chap who looks and sounds a bit like a chap and is dressed like a woman and singing like a man may in fact not be a woman. However, Clodius legs it over the back wall and is away. Everyone and his grandmother knows it's Clodius. He's put on trial for sacrilege. The punishment is terrible. They sew you inside a bag full of all terrible animals, and it's bad. It's bad. Now Clodius says, "Me, governor, wasn't me," and everybody goes, "Oh, okay." Apart from Cicero, who goes, "I saw Publius Clodius. He was definitely in Rome. In fact, he may have been holding a wig at that. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, maybe he was. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't." Now, I look at that and I think, well, what are you doing, Cicero? Now, we know that he wanted to curry favour with Lucullus, Clodius' brother-in-law, because he hates Clodius. And so Cicero thinks, I shall insert myself in this public business and I will, ingratiate myself with important people. Marvellous. Now, it blows up in his stupid face. Cicero says, "I never saw Publius Clodius. He didn't come to my house. He definitely wasn't there." And of course, then everyone swears revenge on Cicero. Cicero's exiled by Clodius for the murder of the conspirators, and he doesn't shut up about it, actually. He writes many letters. They're very boring, but they are on the syllabus, so we do have to study them. Now, if that's not enough for you to see Cicero as untrustworthy, I point you to the fact that 2 minutes, I got to go. Oh, okay, let's run. Now, when they murder Caesar, I like Caesar. I think it's unfortunate they murder him, but there you go. What can I say? They murder Caesar, and nobody tells Cicero because he's an untrustworthy liability. And then he writes to Gaius Tubronius, and he says, "I wish you'd invited me to the glorious banquet on the Ides of March. Then we'd have no leavings." Look at the way the man talks about death, for God's sake. A glorious banquet, no leavings. Good grief. Caesar'd been stabbed 24 times. Now, Cicero's a bloody cold fish, isn't he? 24 times. And they say, "Oh, we'd had no leavings if you'd asked me." Now, tell me you're a sociopath without telling me you're a sociopath, Marcus, and I may believe you. Not only does the man dismiss murder, but he complains there wasn't more of it. He says, "Murder Mark Antony, then we'd be fine, the Republic would be safe." Okay, Marcus, fair enough. Now, if we then examine what he says about Gaius Octavian, Caesar's great-nephew, 18, 19 years old, he says we should use him to prop up the Republic and then we should discard him. Now, we don't know what discard means, but I have to tell you, if you look at what Cicero's willing to do to restore the Republic, you can get the idea. Now, overall, I think Cicero would talk about his concordia ordinum, his harmony of the orders, a republic where everybody works together and harmony reigns. What I would say is, this is a noble aim, but what is Cicero willing to sacrifice to achieve his vision? As I said earlier on, the greatest villains are those who believe their cause is just, while destroying everything else around them. To this end, I present to you once again Marcus Tullius Cicero, narcissist, sociopath, murderer, and ideologue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. I feel it's really important for formats not to go stale. So 1 year we should move Joe back from the sea to the air and do who would you not want to sit next to on a plane?
Royalties, please.
Our next speaker, Dr. Henry Spelman, is an assistant professor in classics at the University of Cambridge and fellow of Christ College. After an early ambition to become a professional ice hockey goalkeeper, a sentence that I've never said out loud before about myself or anybody else, he studied at the University of North Carolina before moving to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. He completed his doctorate at Oxford and then went on to hold fellowships at Merton College, Oxford, and Christ College, Cambridge, where he now teaches. His research focuses on early Greek literature, specifically poetry. But today he's going to speak about someone, I was going to say more familiar, but Henry thinks probably perhaps not familiar. But if he is familiar, then it will not be from poetry, but it will be from the world of philosophy and prose. So here is Dr. Henry Spelman speaking against Critias.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Classics for all the wonderful work they do, and for you guys for coming out. So I think the first and most important reason that Critias of Athens needs to be thrown overboard is that the way that you guys are going to reach that decision is through a democratic vote. Critias is diametrically opposed to precisely that, democracy. So I lead with the statement that a vote against Critias is a vote for having a vote, and that's a good thing. So for reasons you might be able to guess based on my accent, recently I found myself thinking quite a lot about how long-standing democracies descend into oligarchy and how they devolve into tyranny for some reason or other. I don't know the answer to that question, but I know it has something to do with comically villainous people like Critias of Athens. So Critias of Athens makes Donald Trump look like a cuddly orange teddy bear. Critias of Athens makes Putin look like a rank amateur playing with my first dictatorship playset. So let me explain. 405 BCE, Athens has been engaged in this radical experiment in the human spirit. The people had well and truly held power, as they had never held power before, and as they had very seldom had power like that since. Demokratia, in the truest sense of the word, power of the people. Now, all of that comes crashing down in 405, together with the walls of Athens, when Sparta wins the Peloponnesian War. So, what do our lovely new oligarchic overlords do in Athens? Well, the first thing they do is gently suggest to the Athenians that you guys should really bring back all those lovely Athenian oligarchs who went into exile in the democracy. They're actually good guys. And then secondly, they gently suggest, at gunpoint or spear point, that really this whole democracy thing, we need to leave that behind. Let's institute an oligarchy, known as the 30 tyrants, based upon Spartan systems of government. So here's where our man Critias enters the picture. Up to this point, he's been in exile for chopping off the stone penises of the gods. We'll come back to that later. He's hanging out in the backwoods of Greece, fighting against democracy, promoting the cause of oligarchy, generally having a good time. Up to this point, hasn't really been involved in Athenian politics, probably doesn't want to get the stench of the common people on his nose. He's just completely stayed out of things. But all that changes in 405 when the Spartans come back to power. Critias comes running back to Athens yelling, pick me, like the unpopular kid in gym class. And then what does he do? He plants his tongue firmly on the leather boot of Spartan power and starts licking as hard as he can. And actually, Critias' love of Spartan boots is going to come back later too, so wait for that. Okay, so now begins the reign of the 30 tyrants led by our lovely friend Critias. And what you have to know that in Greek imagination, tyranny is a byword for avariciousness and murderousness and lawlessness. So the Athenians multiply that by 30, that's what they're getting. The really remarkable thing about Critias is that the other 29 tyrants think that he is too murderous, too avaricious, and too lawless. They know they're the villains, but they're like, chill out, Critias, dial it back here. No need to go so far overboard. So killing Athenians and taking their money was like popcorn to Critias. He just sort of jams it in his mouth as much as he can, especially summary execution without judge or jury. So does Critias have a personal enemy against somebody? Just kill him. Does somebody politically oppose to 30? Just kill him. Does somebody have money that Critias of Athens actually should have pretty much? Also just kill them. It's that easy. And now Critias also had the very bright idea to implicate as many people as possible in the crimes of the 30. So we're just going to spread out the complicitness like manure over a field so that everybody reeks of the nasty crimes. And if there's nobody innocent of the regime's crime, then there's nobody left to oppose the regime. Makes sense, smart politics. So for instance, Critias asks, Socrates, while you're out, would you mind just leading this totally innocent guy to execution? Socrates, being a dude, says no. And it amazes people that Socrates himself was not killed for refusing to be complicit in the killing of a totally innocent person. So there was another one of the tyrants called Theramenes, who used to be Critias' buddy. And that's not how they ended up in the long run. So Theramenes was the moderate tyrant, if you can believe it, the one who was opposed to indiscriminate killing. And for that reason, he poses a challenge to the rule of the 30 as such, right? If we've got one tyrant who looks like less of a monster, maybe the people will go to his side. Maybe the rule of the 30 isn't quite as stable as we'd like it to be. So what is Critias's answer to this delicate political dilemma? No prizes for guessing. The answer is to kill him. Yeah. So after the moderate tyrant Theramenes gives a popular speech in front of people to wide acclaim, Critias goes off with his buddies into private and they have a little conversation. They come back and they agree, now Theramenes, he's not one of the tyrants and he needs to die for opposing indiscriminate killing. So Theramenes then goes and seeks refuge at an altar where you're supposed to be safe. Critias et co. forcibly pull him away from the altar and force him to kill himself by drinking hemlock, like Socrates. So Theramenes, we have it on good authority, drinks most of the hemlock, bravely condemns himself to die, and then pours out the last few drops and says, that's for my buddy Critias. We're going to have a theme here, which is that being Critias's friends means you get killed. All right, so the absolutist reign of the 30 tyrants, it's so bad that it really doesn't last very long at all, less than 2 years. So over time, eventually enough people leave Athens out of principle or out of fear for their own lives, which kind of run together. So eventually the Democrats come back and initiate a violent, horrific, traumatic civil war that warps the Athenian consciousness for a long time. And Critias dies in that battle, fighting for oligarchy right up until his final breath. When he's gone, eventually the 30 tyrants are off the scene and the long national nightmare is over, except it was only 2 years and so much bad stuff happened. It is remarkable. So Critias is born to the most, or one of the most distinguished families in Athens, and he is the closest thing to a boogeyman to the democratic consciousness as exists in antiquity. He really is the dark cartoon villain of aristocracy, except that's exactly what he really was. We'll get back to that in a second. But one of the things that interests me most about Critias is that he offers this sort of rich mix and match chocolate basket of forms of awfulness that goes way beyond politics. So, for instance, whether you like religion or not, you should very much hate Critias. So, if you like religion, Critias is one of the signal atheists of antiquity. One night, together with his posh aristocratic friends, he gets drunk, goes around Athens, lops off the heads and the penises of poor, defenseless statues of Hermes. We still don't know why they did it, but the theory I like the most is just because it was funny. Yeah? So, everybody guilty of that. The Athenians think this is a major offense against the gods. People need to take responsibility. Critias goes off into exile, where we met him later. Critias is also the author of the most categorical embracing statement of atheism in antiquity. So in one of his fragments, a character introduces this idea that religion is just something made up by a smart person to control through fear the docile, stupid, sheep-like masses. If that sounds like a pretty good description to you, you still shouldn't like Critias, because he thinks he is the smart guy controlling the masses through religion. He's promoting state-organized religion and politics as a way to control the docile, sheep-like masses. That's exactly what he's doing. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Not only that, but Critias wrote poetry, as we talked about before. And it is really bad poetry. Maybe not quite as bad as Cicero's, but very bad poetry indeed. We have no record whatsoever of Critias competing in any of the democratic theatrical competitions, much less him winning them. And when you read the fragments, you can kind of see why that is the case. It's pretty bad. I like to think that these fragments of Critias are preserved by later sources, a bit like why so many paintings of Hitler still exist. You know, it's not the artistic quality that's interesting here. It's the fact that the insane murderer wielded a paintbrush. So that's why we have it. Not just poetry, Critias also wrote philosophy. And his philosophy, as you might have guessed, is dedicated to how great it is to be an oligarch, and specifically how great it is to be a Spartan. So the topics covered include how the Spartans have the best cups, how the Spartans have the best dancing, how the Spartans have the best shoes, and somehow their political power depends on them having this particular weird sort of shoes. So I like to think Critias was almost literally a bootlicker of Spartan power. So he also covered some more serious topics. So he said, you know, this whole Spartan system of eugenics, that might be a good idea. That's got some sense to it. Here are the merits of it. He also comments on how the Spartans have this really clever system of keeping an absolute permanent oppression, their resident slave population, and making sure there's never a violent revolt. The answer is just take away their arms, and if there ever is an uprising, they don't have anything to hurt you with it. So When he comes to power, Critias does exactly the same thing in Athens, treating his fellow citizens like the Spartans treated their slaves. And that's not all Critias has to do with philosophy. So when he's young, he's a really close associate of Socrates, and not even Plato can hide that. But when Critias comes to power, he tries to legally outlaw the teaching of philosophy, specifically targeting Socrates. So Xenophon, who's fairly reliable, has a story that Socrates likens Critias' political leadership to this insane herdsman who's deliberately killing his own flocks. Critias gets words of that, brings Socrates in, they have a chat. Critias says, don't talk about justice. Don't talk about what's good. And for the love of God, don't talk about shepherds, or I will have one fewer sheep, threatening to kill Socrates in a not so subtle way. So Critias was a bad philosopher, and he also more or less directly killed the most important philosopher of all time. So Socrates gets killed 399 BC. Why does Socrates get killed? Probably not so much for introducing new gods, probably not so much for corrupting the young, but rather because in the mind of Democrats who had come back to power, Socrates was responsible for forming, and morally forming and educating, the most villainous, murderous, oligarchic dudes of the last generation. And obviously, Exhibit A there is going to be Critias, the most murderous, avaricious, oligarchic, vicious dude of all time. In a very real sense, the reason that the Athenians think Socrates has to die is because he made Critias what Critias was. And a lot of later Greek philosophy, including a whole lot of Plato, is specifically trying to absolve Socrates of that charge, whether true or not. So, for a bad poet, I reckon Critias had a pretty good innings. He killed a lot of his fellow citizens, he killed democracy, and he killed the father of philosophy. Impressive. But when we zoom back a bit and think about Critias in the larger sort of the entire panoply of antiquity, two things really strike me. The first is that absolutely everyone hates Critias. We have this huge amount of pretty contemporary texts, and they all hate Critias. And that's unique to him. So, you know, Thucydides hates the oligarchs, but obviously other people like the oligarchs. We have evidence for other views. Plato hates the sophists, but lots of people love the sophists. Things are different when it comes to Critias. Everybody absolutely hates him. Though Thucydides knows him personally, Thucydides hates Critias. Xenophon must have known him since they are both young men in short pants. Xenophon absolutely hates Critias. Plato is Critias' nephew, and Plato hates Critias too. I would suggest that you also have very good reason to hate Critias. So the second really big impressive thing that strikes me about Critias is that the worst stories about him are also the most reliable. And that's generally not how it works in antiquity. So you've got a villain, and then as times go on, you know, the stories become more fantastical, right? So, you know, Xerxes practiced cannibalism and killed every virgin on his way to Greece or whatever. You know, the stories get more grand as we go through time. But that's not what it's like with Critias at all. When you hear later texts talk about Critias, you get the impression that they really couldn't invent anything worse to say about him than what actually was the truth that they knew from the same sources that we do. So Philostratus, an author that Emma works on, teller of tales, writing maybe half a millennium after Critias is dead, he says, and this is a verbatim quote, not a loose translation, "He seems to me to have been the worst human being of all time." So Philostratus then goes to add nothing salacious that we didn't already know about Critias. The cartoon villain cannot become any more of a cartoon villain in the later tradition because that's what he already was in our very earliest sources. Remarkable. And I think the final reason to kill Critias is what his death represented for Athens. So after Critias died, after this bloody civil war, after the national nightmare of 2 years, internecine warfare, destruction of the city, leaving a scar, then the Athenian Democrats come back into power, and they issue an amnesty to everybody out there except for the 30 tyrants themselves. Those are the only people who aren't forgiven. Everybody else, don't remember evils, move on forward, amnesty, creating a new world. And we tend to think about 405, you know, and the end of the Peloponnesian War as the end of Athenian power, and In some ways that's true, but when we look at democracy, it's not true at all. After the death of Critias, the Athenians return to democracy, and they return in an even more radical, thoroughgoing way to one political system that we might like to think that we uphold today. So today, you've got another chance to get rid of Critias, and I very much hope you will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. A really powerful example of how sometimes the ancient and modern analogies don't need to be forced, but we'll just let them stand side by side. We started with the, orange cuddly bear, but I think it reverberates all the way through. Dr. Ben Cartlidge, our third speaker, is a lecturer in Greek culture and classical receptions at the University of Liverpool. He studied classics at Trinity College, Oxford, before completing further postgraduate work in Greek and comparative philology at the University of Cologne, and later returning to Oxford for his doctorate in linguistics. His research focuses on language and linguistics and literary text, with particular interest in comedy, epigram, and Hellenistic poetry. Now, this isn't on his bio, and I didn't even run this past Ben, but I just wanted to tell you this fact that he's also a phenomenal violinist, and I just feel that needs to be known. Tonight, he'll be speaking about someone who is, I suppose, differently and equally melodic, and probably not someone that we'd think would be a contender for an Overboard anti-balloon debate. One of the most celebrated, elusive, and cherished figures from a tiny minority of the ancient surviving record, Sappho.
Thank you very much for a very generous introduction in all sorts of ways. Well now, don't I find myself in an awkward situation? I want to remind you of the setup. These are the people who were in the boat. Don't forget that. Therefore, we have to consider who it is we're going to throw overboard. And that means considering all of the people in the boat equally. And if one of them happens to be Sappho, then we need to put her case. She must be assessed dispassionately alongside everyone else. However, I'm going to need a bit of help. And so I'm going to summon up the spirit of a deceased distinguished lawyer and think first about what Demosthenes might have said about this. Members of the jury, Sappho of Lesbos hereby stands indicted with the following charges: not corrupting the young, not worshipping false gods, not debasing coinage, nor unlawful killing. No, her crime is more heinous than any of these. Not, that is to say, that she has always been considered innocent of such charges. Many in the 19th century would have thought nothing of considering her a baleful influence. But in this court, Sappho of Lesbos is hereby indicted with theft. She is an habitual criminal, hardened and cynical, who thinks naught of depriving innocent victims of what is rightfully theirs. And yet you will find no silver nor gold about her person, no sliver of jewellery that cannot be accounted for, no gem, no artifact, no valuable plaything. For it is her very shadow in which the spectre of crime lurks, a darkness no gaze can penetrate. Sappho of Lesbos, members of the jury, has been stealing the limelight. Consider, if you will, the case of the heinously wronged Kono, who lived on Lesbos in the late 8th century. Kono was born into a relatively aristocratic context, and as part of regular training for girls on Lesbos, learned to play several musical instruments and sing. In common with many generations of singers in Lesbos and on the Troad, Kono acquired the art of traditional lesbian song, which celebrated companionship in many forms, quite unlike the combat-obsessed, competitive hexameter sung by hard-handed warriors on luted instruments. That doesn't mean lutes, by the way. Kono used traditional language, a well-known adornment of the music for which Lesbos was so famous. Kono, however, was an illiterate singer. She drew upon a stock of phrases regular in metrical shape and suitable for songs, phrases that had been sung for generation after generation. Did Kono exist? I have no idea. But as far as I'm concerned, I invented her. We know as little of the other Sapphos as we do of the other Homers. Yet other Homers there most certainly were. We all know that. And just as surely there were other Sapphos. One way we know this is the evidence of meter. The Sapphic stanza. Sapphic indeed. Is one of the few Greek metrical structures, I should say, that can be traced into prehistory. Unlike the hexameter, which at least in the form in which it was practiced, I'm going to say by Hesiod rather than by Homer because of question marks, the hexameter is a thoroughly Greek invention, but the Sapphic stanza can be mapped even onto Vedic, onto Indic metrical shapes, particularly a line called the Trishtub. Lines such as Icham mitvam drastumaham tataiva, just as before I desire to see you, Bhagavad Gita 11:46, is metrically a single syllable away from painatai moi kenosis teoisinem menoner, maybe the most famous line of Sappho in her corpus. And I've got to say, just as before I desire to see you, is pretty close to Sapphic content as well. In fact, if Sappho were to sing that, she might have put it, hos tetoprin kaise iden pothemi. That's what we can imagine Sappho singing. Yet this stanza bears her name, Sapphic, as if she was the fons et origo. Sapphic members of the jury, as if bards were not already chanting verse in this form since Indo-European times. Who sung the Sapphic stanza before Sappho? Myriads, and yet their names we will never know. Sappho, members of the jury, has thrown her shadow across them. Now, I know what you're thinking. Perhaps some of you think all this rhetoric of theft is a little overblown. Sappho, after all, is hardly the only figure from the ancient or modern world to have benefited from the labour of others. In a sense, what I would prefer is to slightly bend the rules of the debate. Sappho need not be consigned, as far as I'm concerned, to a salty grave. Perhaps she need only be dipped temporarily in the drink for a bit. Because for just a time I want to imagine a world in which the other women of antiquity who sung their songs were allowed to sing just a little bit louder. There is, after all, no doubt that it is Sappho's very mystery that has contributed to her myth. Sappho is, I suggest, no supreme poetess. She is merely the lucky one. She is lucky because her mystery has become mystique and not obscurity. Would a papyrus of Moiro be forged today? Or a Nike? What about a papyrus of Phimonoe or of Demo? What of Myrtis? I would wager very few have even heard of these authoresses of the ancient world. Yet oddly enough, the economy of mystery has only profited the knowledge-based balance of one of these figures. Myrtis, for instance, was the mentor of Pindar, according to the ancient biographies. What kind of songs might she have sung? What did Pindar learn from her? Water is best, sings Pindar. Who of us has not been told that by a female mentor? Normally mother. Evidence of what Pindar learned. If a papyrus of Phimonoe turned up, I imagine it would raise eyebrows. She was credited in antiquity with the invention of the hexameter. As the first priestess of Delphi, the hexameter, members of the jury. Surely no meter more muscular ever trotted from the mouths of man. Yet the ancients thought that a woman invented it. And we will see later on that women were expert wielders of it, even in the opinions of men. If the existence of Myrtis and Phimonoe is doubtful, yet is not Sappho's just as doubtful? Is not Homer's? Do not learned papers persuade us that Homer never was? Are we not even unaware of what consonant began the spelling of Sappho's name? If the existence of Myrtis and Phimonoe is doubtful, who would not long for the complete commentary on Homer written by Demo, one of the few female scholars whose work has survived in fragments before the late antique philosopher Hypatia? These are the women that the myopic attention paid to Sappho has deprived us of. All their learning, all their achievements, let us go out on a limb and say their beauty. And yet Sappho alone is antiquity's female poet, the 10th muse. I remind you that the muses have already been brought before you for judgment. This is an opportunity to right a double wrong. No surprise that it was the sudden appearance of a Sappho poem a few years ago that brought a rush of attention. In the meantime, when a papyrus of Empedocles turned up, he had to wait 18 years for all the letters to be read correctly. No gold rush for male poets, always only Sappho. The commentaries on her work mount up volume by volume, tomes of compendious fact-finding about scrap after scrap, while forgotten text after forgotten text languishes waiting for its day. We may not want or need less Sappho, but we need and should want more of everyone else. After all, the ancients themselves saw Sappho as a point of comparison for other poets. Meleager sets Moiro and Onitie, his Hellenistic predecessors, alongside Sappho. Here's some of Moiro's stuff. So it was that Zeus was reared to be great on Crete, and no immortal knew of him, yet he grew in all his limbs. Him then did the timid birds raise in a cave of many gods, bringing ambrosia from the streams of the ocean. From a rock did an eagle draw nectar and brought it to him, cunning Zeus, in its beak. So when he had defeated Father Kronos, far-seeing Zeus made the eagle immortal and gave it heaven for a home. So too he honoured the timid doves, who are the messengers of the summer and the winter. If Sappho is the Emily Dickinson of classical literature, lonely, slightly sad, famous for a lucky break, Moiro is the Annie Oakley. Anything you can do, she seems to say, I can do better. Even fans of Sappho constantly apologise for her, arguing that it is her flaws that make her unique. Why not prefer a poet who wrote without flaws? Let us pay attention to a female poet who could beat men at their game like Moiro could, who didn't have to join another team. Sappho has had more commentaries in the 21st century, I can think of 4 off the top of my head, than Onitie has had in the history of classical scholarship. I can only think of 1. Sappho is often praised because she's a counterbalance to Homer. The implication is a male view of literature and, by extension, life. Moiro and Sappho on this view might be said to be examples of equality feminism and difference feminism, respectively. Now, I will not legislate the critiques of these positions, but I think it worth formulating these terms in part to show that there is no such thing as open quotation marks, the ancient female poet, close quotation marks. It comes as a surprise to many, even today, that ancient people were different from each other, and to many more that women are different from each other. So, by the way, are Athenians. Men must undoubtedly make more space, but so should Sappho, and it starts on this boat. I wish to finish with a personal reflection. Many years ago, I was that gay teenager that loved Sappho. But then I read her to impress an admissions tutor. I read her to study Greek lyric. I read her to study Greek dialects. I read her to study the Greek dialects again. I did a master's at the university where the first famous Sappho papyrus was kept. And now I open my Lobel page with the sigh of weary familiarity. Members of the jury, your duty is clear. It is Sappho that must go overboard.
Ben, thank you so much. I've never heard a more erudite and discursive ancient version of the "Why don't we have International Men's Day too?" Empedocles, Sappho, and everything in between proves that statement false, right? Our final speaker, and with enormous thanks to him for stepping in, is John Harvey, who is a British comedian, writer and performer. He's contributed to some of the UK's, I probably don't need to tell most people in the room this, to some of the UK's most acclaimed satirical television shows, including In the Thick of It, Have I Got News for You? Wonder where else we've heard that in Classics for All. Yes, Minister. Harvey's online comedy videos have garnered over 20 million views, almost as many as I'm sure are watching online tonight. And his Radio 4 collaborator Rod Newman won 2 BBC Audio Drama Awards. In 2018, he also introduced the character Count Binface, an intergalactic political candidate who has run in multiple UK elections, and I hope more soon, including 2021 and 2024 London mayoral elections. And he has, and this is probably the most important line to say, been a long-time supporter of Classics for All, including tonight. And he's going to be talking about my hero as a scholar of epic, Odysseus.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, I should say I've just been outed as Count Binface. It's like that scene in Return of the Jedi where you see underneath Darth Vader and you go, ugh. Is that it? So apologies. I'm here in human form tonight. I was going to start with a bit of housekeeping first. I want to congratulate the other speakers for putting forward such excellent cases. Secondly, I want to curse them because they've set the bar so high. And thirdly, I do want to just say, yes, I got the call to do this at 11 a.m. this morning when I was taking my car for its MOT. I am just a lovely amateur like you. I was coming along to watch, hence the scruffy get-up. But I said I'd do it because I love classics, I love Classics for All, and I knew exactly which ancient figure I'd want to save from the sea. Ovid. Then I realised we were actually supposed to be throwing someone in, and I was back at square one. I even brought my Ars Amatoriate. So, but it's okay, because I know exactly who needs to go in the drink. Now, given that I wrote this about 2 hours ago in a cafe, bear with me. And if anything I say is persuasive, it has nothing to do with my skills as a speaker, because the case is simply so overwhelming. There is only one choice. The person we need to throw overboard is Odysseus. And yes, just my luck, I have a Homer expert who loves Odysseus sitting right next to me as the chair, so strap in. Yes, Odysseus, by far the most famous of our 4 contenders, or rather the most infamous, and with good reason. In fact, on the way in this evening, one of the guests here described Odysseus as Marmite. Well, I quite agree, if that sort of sickly brown smear was not yeast extract, but rather bovine feces. What is wrong with Odysseus? Well, let's start at the first line of the Odyssey, polutropon. Emily Wilson translates this as a complicated man. Literally, it means the man of many twists and turns. But Professor Simon Goldhill put it best. He is, and I quote, a tricky bastard. What's the first thing Odysseus is famous for? No, not the horse. We'll get to that. No, before that, let's wind the clock back to before the Trojan War. Does he willingly take up arms with his Greek allies when he's asked? No, of course he doesn't. He tries to wriggle out of it. This guy is a charlatan who came from family money to rule his land and who tried to dodge the draft. Bigly so. Is this ringing any bells, Henry? That's right, we have an ancient trump on our hands, and then some. And how did he try to dodge the draft? By sticking his baby son Telemachus in front of a plough and threatening to run him over to pretend that he was mad. So he's not just a selfish coward, he's a horrific parent too. Ithaca's social services left a lot to be desired. What about during the Trojan War then? Well, let's have a look at the evidence. In Book 9 of the Iliad, this supposed master persuader is tasked with persuading Achilles to come back and end the war. And he fails. Is Achilles just too stubborn to comply? Maybe. Or is it almost like Odysseus doesn't actually want the war to end? More on that in a moment. There's another big moment in the Trojan War after Achilles is killed. There's a big row about which Greek deserves to get the dead man's armour. Who's the next best? Ajax is convinced it must be him, but no, the armour goes to Odysseus. Ajax, whose entire existence and psyche are bound up in honour. Does Odysseus know this? Of course he does. Does he care about the armour as much as Ajax? No, he doesn't. Does he do the noble thing and hand it on? Of course not. Result, Ajax kills himself. Another death on Odysseus' hands. Now we get to the big one, the big wooden one, the Trojan horse. Firstly, if Odysseus is such a mastermind, how did it take him 10 years to come up with it? Maybe not quite the genius he'd like to claim. Unless, of course, again, having gone to war, he wasn't quite so keen on going home as he claims. Secondly, what a hideous, cowardly and underhand way to win a war by taking advantage of your opponent's piety, sleepiness, and yes, naivety, to slaughter them in cold blood in the middle of the night and burn their city to the ground. He makes Critias look like Greta Thunberg. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts? No, do not besmirch a whole nation. Simply beware of Odysseus. He's an evil bastard. The Geneva Conventions were invented to stop people like him. Now we get to the main event, the Odyssey itself, which when you get down to it is pretty much a 12,000-line charge sheet against him. Remember, he leaves the Trojan War in charge of 12 ships and about 600 men. How many survive at the end? Around about none of them. And how do they die? Scylla eats 6. Polyphemus the Cyclops takes 6 more. The Cicones kill 72 for stealing their wives. And the Lystrygonians polish off 11 ships worth. Or do they? Remember, in the Odyssey, Odysseus ends up in Scheria, trying to convince King Alcinous and the Phaeacians to give him a lift home in their fast ships. And to convince them he's such a great bloke, and that the absence of his 600 men is nothing to do with him, honest governor, he spins them quite the merry yarn. The Cyclops, the Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, the Lystrygonians, all the big tales you've heard of, they come from Odysseus' mouth. Did he really defeat those monsters? Did he even meet them? Did he really spend a year with Circe, who was demanding sex with him? Did he really spend 7 years with Calypso, who kept demanding sex with him? Ladies present, you know he's a lying bastard. Is it more likely that he made the whole thing up? And was he really so keen to get home to Penelope? I say you can't trust a word the man says. He's about as reliable as GB News. Just look at the fact that director Christopher Nolan is making his next film an adaptation of the Odyssey. This is the man who made Inception. Spoiler alert, the whole thing's just a dream. It's a trick. He made The Prestige, which is not about David Bowie and a cloning machine. It's a con trick about doubles. And he made The Dark Knight about an evil liar and trickster. Do you see the theme emerging? This is why he's making the Odyssey. He wants his ultimate film to be about the ultimate liar. To quote Edmund Blackadder, his whole life is a tissue of whoppers. Except Odysseus never owns up to it. Oh, and I haven't even mentioned yet what our man does when he finally gets home to Ithaca. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, but of course, he slaughters all 100 suitors who'd been courting Penelope and then, for good measure, massacres his own maidservants who'd been consorting with the suitors too. A literal case of overkill, if ever there was one. And that needs justice meting out tonight. And don't forget what Odysseus does after he finally gets home to his long-suffering wife. In some versions of the myth, he promptly sods off again. He's an utter bastard. So let's just compare how this all stacks up against the opposition. Cicero. Yes, he was boring. Yes, he was a knob. But he was a statesman in a world of would-be despots. He saved the Roman Republic, tried to save it again, and he got killed for his trouble. Sappho, one of the world's great lyric poets who spent her life bottling love into verse. If she gets pushed into the sea, this might as well be the Reform UK conference. Doesn't mean it won't happen. That's up to you. And then there's Critias. To quote Alan Partridge, whatever. Thing is, all those guys are historical. They all got their comeuppance in the end. None of them could get away in real life with what Odysseus did. Nor could you. And remember, he had Athena's help along the whole way. Speaking of gods, we're told that Odysseus suffered from having a big old beef with Poseidon. So I say there can be no more fitting conclusion to this charlatan's life than to give him a reunion with the Lord of the Sea and chuck him in the ocean. Of course, you have heard 4 strong arguments tonight, and who you choose to throw off the boat is up to you. All I'll say is if you leave Odysseus on board, the only one who's going to make it safely to shore tonight, out of all of you, including the boat, is Odysseus. The guy's dangerous. Don't fall for his charms. Shove him in the drink. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. Obviously, I'm completely neutral and impartial to all speeches, but what I will say is that we all are very attentive to how classics in macro and micro ways has entered into popular consciousness. But whenever anyone uses the word Odyssey, it's like when they use the word epic and they'll say, oh yes, it was a great voyage, it was an Odyssey. An Odyssey is a voyage from which only one person returns. That's not something that should be used in a positive way. But other than that, he's a great guy. So he's bad etymologically, but great otherwise. I will now invite, John's kind of done his version, so you'll have to think more ways. I will now invite all 4 of our speakers to come on and do, and I'm now going to be very strict with timing, a real lightning pitch, 30 seconds max, final pitch to all of you for why your character should be cast overboard, which can be, completely muse-inspired to riff off Ben's riff off Llewellyn from last year. We're now so deep in Overboard that we can connect them. We've got our own mythology. But you can also counteract anyone else's cases too, if you so desire. So no pressure, but Danny, up you come.
Now, you lot think this is a fatal 4-way. This is not a fatal 4-way. This is a one-on-one contest, okay? You can't get rid of Odysseus. He can fix the boat, or at least that's what he'd tell you. You can't get rid of Sappho, because it's not her usual meter, but you know what? She might make a good poem about it when you get home. So she's out, which means it's just Critias, and it's just Cicero. Now, as terrible as Critias may or may not have been, 2 years is a drop in the metaphorical ocean. It's an out. Cicero has been giving you lot grief for thousands and thousands of years. So, one-on-one contest, my foot. Critias is staying, and Cicero for the drink.
So I'd just like to begin by reminding you that Odysseus did get thrown off a ship, and it didn't do anything. He just swam to shore. You're not going to accomplish anything. And Sappho, she's not preserved by chance. She's preserved because she's a great poetess. She didn't win the lottery. She earned it. Don't bring down your sisters, ladies. And actually, Cicero, you can kill Cicero if you want. That's fine. If you don't kill Critias, he's just going to kill everybody else on the boat anyway. I'm a serious historian. I don't believe in, moral judgments about the past. I just want to understand the past better. I went back and reread all the texts that mention Critias, and he is uniquely morally evil in a way that is truly shocking and was a surprise to me going back. Genuinely, he's genuinely evil. Thank you.
Well, you can't trust someone who believes in value-free history. So I think it was me who told Danny that he had the easiest job, and he does, because Cicero, yeah, we get it. Anyone who studied classics doesn't like it. If we're going to call Cicero narcissistic because of writing one poem about the time he was in power, what are we going to say about Sappho, who's done nothing but wang on about how unhappy she always is? She keeps going on about how much she wants to die because love is making her hurt. Let's finish the job, throw her over. She's begging for it. Right, Critias. Being an atheist isn't criteria for being executed. I think that's very, very dubious. He goes on about how good it is to be an oligarch. It is good to be an oligarch. It just sucks for everybody else. If everybody hates Critias, to get rid of him, that's just mob rule, and we don't want that. Now, if equality means anything, It means we have to consider the possibility that there'd be a 25% chance, for purely statistical reasons, that it would be Sappho. If my arguments earlier have had any purchase, do it. You know it makes sense.
Okay, all right. I've already had one bite of these guys, but I'm happy to take another one. Okay, first you've got Danny, our modern-day Clodius. I'm not sure he's quite as depraved, but who knows? We'll find out later, right? Just because you're struggling to find a verb, I'm not sure that is reason to kill him. I mean, you are a tutor. Was he an arrogant busybody? I say Cicero was a self-made underdog statesman. You know, this isn't an aeroplane trip. This is life and death. And as for Catiline, you say he's someone who wanted to abolish debt. You make him sound like an ancient Jeremy Corbyn, which makes me love Cicero all the more. As for Henry, the ice hockey goalkeeper, so when I heard what he was talking about Critias, I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm like, this breaches the language barrier slightly, but what the puck? You're talking about, if you're worried about democracy, you must be worried about liars. I mean, democracy, yes, that affects your life. Lying affects and ruins your entire life. Plus, he was only in charge for 2 years, and he could handle an oligarchy of 30. So 3 on a boat, easy peasy. Whereas Odysseus was a scumbag for his entire life. And as for Sappho, I mean, nice try, Benjamin. But, you know, she ain't going in, let's be honest. I'm wasting my breath. But, you know, you're you want the violinist, you want to fiddle while she drowns. It's not going to happen. You said yourself you only want to give her a little dip anyway, like a sort of amorous Achilles. Well, I say that's fine, but is that a reason to kill her? No. There is only one person who needs to go. The one who's never had his real comeuppance. The one who, yes, he's been in the sea, but as Emma said, the rules are tonight. It's actually for good. Give Odysseus what he deserves. Get him.
Thank you so much to all our speakers. Now, this is the bit that I suppose gets technical, whereby we're going to do, as I said, a very old-fashioned voting system for people in the room. So I hope you've been, well, A, ruminating, but also B, deciding firmly in the imperfect and then in the aorist, for those of you who know your Greek. So I'm now going to ask, and I'm looking at Sasha for a bit of help, because I don't want to get it wrong, and you know I can count metrically but not really numerically. So I'm going to do a show of hands in terms of who would like to cast Overboard, and then I think at the back we'll have an online vote too. They're going to be 2 separate votes, and if they coincide, fantastic, and if they don't, then that's a wonderful thing. So decision-making time over. Who would vote for Cicero to be cast overboard? Sasha, are you taking a...
Think of the Latinists, please.
Ready? I don't even need to say because we're in respectable company, but don't double vote. Ruins the whole system. Who would vote for Critias?
Democracy is not going to defend itself.
Who would vote for Sappho?
Go on, be brave.
I always get a host vote, by the way. And who would vote for my man Odysseus? Both. Yes. Okay, so the votes are in, and in both virtual and in-person voting, Critias is gone. So I'd like to thank again all of our speakers, all of you and Linklaters, and as I said before, now let's please move into the other room to continue, I suppose, the debate, although you can't debate Critias anymore because it doesn't exist. Left antiquity.
Fantastic. Well done. Well done. Well.